One of the easiest and most common layer effects that you'll see is the technique used to create a transparent watermark, or the ability to overlay your logo on top of an image, yet still see through to the image underneath. In order to do this, I'm going to tap the T key in order to select the type tool, and then you can enter in whatever options you want for your type. When you click in the image area, we'll want to type in the copyright symbol. So on the Mac, hold down the Option key and just tap the G key. On Windows, you can hold down the Alt key and then type 0169 on the extended keyboard in order to get the copyright symbol, or you can use the character map utility. Now I'll add a space, and then I'll put a year, and then I'll type in my name. If I wanted to make this larger, I could hold down the Command key. I'll start dragging the corner anchor point in order to enlarge it, and then I'll hold down the Shift key as well in order to constrain the proportion. I'll make it large here just to make sure that we can see what's happening. I'll release the mouse, and then if I want to reposition it before I apply the text, as long as my cursor is a decent distance away from the type, I can actually click and drag in order to reposition that. All right, let's commit to that text by tapping the Enter or the Return key. And now we're going to add our layer style. So you can add a variety of different layer styles here. I think probably one of the easier ones to see is the drop shadow or the bevel and emboss. So let's start with the drop shadow. I'll move the layer style out of the way. Here we can click in the image area to reposition the drop shadow. In this case, I'm going to leave the distance rather tight, so I'll leave it down at 4 pixels. And I might decrease the size as well down to 4 pixels. I don't really want a soft edge on the drop shadow because the softer the edge, the more difficult it will be to read the watermark. Now, the only thing that I need to do is move to my blending options. There are two areas, the general blending and the advanced blending. If I change the opacity in the general blending, let's go ahead and move that around 50%. Look what's happened on my layers panel. The opacity for the layer has been moved down to 49%. So these two work in tandem. They're the exact same controls. When I move up the opacity in my general blending, I'm moving the opacity of the layer on my layers panel. So sure enough, if I bring my opacity all the way down to 0, the problem is that not only do I lose the text or whatever is on that layer, I'm also losing the layer style. What I need to do is I need to lose the opacity of the text so that we can see through the text, but I need the layer style to still remain. And the way you do that is by using the fill opacity slider in the advanced blending area. So as I decrease the fill opacity, the text is becoming more and more transparent. If I take it all the way down to 0, we can see right through the type, but we can still see that drop shadow effect. And sure enough, if we look over on our layers panel, you can see that I've changed the fill opacity to 0. So that's the big difference between the opacity slider and the fill opacity slider. The opacity takes down everything that's on the layer. The fill opacity will leave our styles. Now I'm just going to increase the fill opacity a little bit. I just want a little bit darker text there, so it just makes a little bit more of a statement. Now, if we think this is something that we're going to use over and over again, then I'll click on the word styles here, and we can create a new style, and I'll just call this my copyright style. In this case, I want to include the layer effects because that's the drop shadow effect, and I also want to include the layer blending options because the blending options were what allowed me to decrease the fill. When I click OK and OK again, you can see that I have my effects applied on my layers panel, and if I tap the V key to access the Move tool, I can move the type layer anywhere in my image. It's completely flexible, and I'll always see through to the photograph or the content underneath it. Because it's type, if I think it's too big or if I think it's too small, we can go in with Free Transform using Command T or Control T, and then we can scale this down, because remember, it's type. Type is vector-based in Photoshop, which means that it's infinitely scalable. I'll never lose any image quality scaling it up or scaling it down. Excellent! So you can see how easy it is to create your own transparent watermark using the layer styles in Photoshop.